There has been quite a lot of interest across online channels following the UAE's recent announcement that it is amending the country's Commercial Companies Law, also known as the CCL, to allow 100% foreign ownership of mainland companies in the UAE. This appears to represent a significant shift from the existing default position where mainland companies have been subject to foreign ownership restrictions under the CCL, and it has typically been mandatory for them to have a local sponsor holding a majority share in the mainland company. Let's break it down in this video. Now, first off, if you're wondering what a UAE mainland company is, this is a topic that I've covered in an earlier video, which you can watch if you want to learn more and have a bit more of a background. A link to that video is mentioned in the description box below. As a brief reminder, these are companies that are set up within the UAE mainland framework and are typically licensed and regulated by the relevant Department of Economic Development within the emirate in which they are registered. Mainland companies can trade and do business freely across the local UAE market and have usually been favoured for the flexibility that they offer with local business and trade. Fundamentally, mainland companies have been subject to foreign ownership restrictions whereby a foreign party is permitted to own up to a maximum of 49% of the company, the majority of the company having to be owned by a UAE national or a corporate entity that is wholly owned by a UAE national. There were some exceptions to that rule, some of which I mentioned in my previous video. However, on the whole, this has been the long-standing default position under the CCL. Now, understandably, a business person might have valid concerns about setting up their own business through a mainland company and effectively giving away a majority share in their company to a local sponsor. What would often happen in practice is that mechanisms would be put in place to try and allay those concerns, things like setting more favourable distribution of profits for the foreign party and incorporating this into the company's constitutional documents. It would also be quite common to put in place either a standalone agreement or a suite of documents, private documents, which altogether had an aim of diluting the power and control of the local sponsor over the company and divert it to the foreign party so that they were effectively in full control. The standalone agreement was usually referred to as a side agreement, and the suite of documents have been known as a protection suite. The efficacy of such arrangements has always been up for debate. However, these mechanisms have reflected a commonly used approach in the face of foreign ownership restrictions for mainland companies. In recent times, the Foreign Direct Investment Law, or FDI law, was introduced to begin to allow 100% foreign ownership of mainland companies in certain sectors and subject to certain conditions. It was well documented when it was unveiled and was the first sign of a considerable shift in the foreign ownership rules for mainland companies. It was the FDI law which made it possible to have 100% foreign ownership in mainland companies, provided certain conditions were met. Under the FDI law, what we had were a positive and a negative list of sectors and business activities. The positive list outlined, I think, around 122 different types of business activities in which a mainland company could be set up, and 100% of the company could be owned by a foreign party. Whereas the negative list outlines certain sectors and business activities exempt from the FDI law and therefore not permitted as a mainland company with 100% foreign ownership. With the introduction of the FDI law along with its positive list, this was seen as a significant development and one which represented a significant shift in the UAE's approach to foreign ownership restrictions for its mainland companies. At the time, it may have been envisaged that the FDI law would lead to significant changes in the business and commercial landscape of the UAE. Regardless, what was clear was the path towards easing the foreign ownership restrictions for mainland companies. So the news about 100% foreign ownership of mainland companies is not exactly new. It was possible under the existing FDI law. However, the FDI law perhaps had some drawbacks. For example, high capital requirements were typically needed, which may have put it out of reach for small startups or new SMEs. And this brings us to the recently announced amendments to the CCL, with one of the main amendments being around foreign ownership restrictions, and which has received headline-grabbing attention. There are 51 articles of the CCL that have been amended, mainly around joint stock companies and LLCs. Some new provisions have also been added. It is also of note that the FDI law, which I spoke about earlier, has been repealed, and in its place are the amendments to the CCL. The foreign ownership restriction under Article 10 of the CCL has been removed to allow 100% foreign ownership in mainland companies, except in strategic activities and business sectors. The key takeaway just now is that it remains to be seen how this is going to operate and work in practice. The changes delegate a lot of responsibility in terms of the implementation to a committee to be formed and the relevant licensing authorities. So at the moment, it is unclear what all this means in practice. I can add 2 important points for you onto the key takeaway. First, the committee to be formed will identify the strategic activities and business sectors in which foreign ownership restrictions will continue to apply. And second, the relevant licensing authority has delegated authority in determining what percentage, if any, of a mainland company must be held by a UAE national. In this way, a foreign ownership restriction can be applied by a relevant licensing authority. From this, and at least for just now, we can see that it is certainly not an overarching blanket removal of the foreign ownership restriction for mainland companies. It very much remains to be seen the types of mainland companies that will be eligible for 100% foreign ownership, or on the other hand, which mainland companies will require a UAE national to hold a percentage share in it, and the level of that percentage as set by the relevant licensing authority. This is very much an ongoing development, and hopefully there will be more clarity for us as time goes on. There's a whole bunch of other changes too, however for the purposes of this video I wanted to focus on the foreign ownership restriction side of things in respect of mainland companies, as this point seems to have captured the most attention in press reports and across online channels. This sort of thing can be a bit of a minefield, and it isn't always as straightforward or as black and white as it first appears to be. It's always a good idea to obtain expert advice if you need it to help you make informed decisions about your business plans in the UAE. I hope you found this video useful. If you have any questions or queries on the subject matter of this video, or would like to learn more about anything that I have discussed here, then please do feel free to reach out at any time. That's all for now. See you next time.